Now you cue, I just on it, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting shortly. This session, this forum will be carried live on our Facebook. So it's taking a little bit of more time to organize. We should be starting in about 4 minutes. Dato', Datin, and distinguished guests, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon. Welcome to the inaugural NST Insight Forum. We are truly honored to have you with us today to participate in an open discourse and exchange of views on a topic that we believe is of interest to every Malaysian today: the Malaysian economy, issues, and challenges. We have with us a prominent panel which needs no introduction. Deputy Minister of Defence Yang Berhormat Liew Tong, and Member of Parliament for Rembau Yang Berhormat Khairy Jamaluddin. And to ensure that the objective of today's forum is met, the task of providing the neutral voice for the forum falls upon none other than the NST leader writer, Encik Abdul Rahim Maidin. Before we proceed with the forum proper, we would like to invite Cik Mustafa Kamil, the Executive Director of News and Editorial Operations Media Prima Berhad, to give the welcoming address.
Thank you, Chief Fauzia. A very warm welcome, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, to the new Straits Times building. I am sure we know why we are here this afternoon, and I am excited as you are to proceed with the forum proper. The new Straits Times is pleased to bring to you its NST Insight series, where we will, from time to time, invite guests for open and intellectual discourse on a variety of current issues. As a press institution, we firmly believe that an open society will bring about a strong society and ultimately a strong nation. We would like to thank the two gentlemen whom have agreed to appear as panelists today. YB Senator Liew Tong, Deputy Minister of Defence, and YB Khairy Jamaluddin, Member of Parliament for Rembau. These two in a bit. The topic of our forum today, which will touch on state of the economy, also touches every segment of our society. And indeed, the economy could well determine the fate of our beloved nation. Thank you once again to our honorable guests, especially to our two panelists today. And I'm sure that you're not here to listen to me speak, so thank you.
Thank you, Chimus. Ladies and gentlemen, as the oldest print media in the country, we will be 175 years next year. The NST prides itself in taking the lead in forming the thinking process of our readers while garnering an audience beyond the country. The NST Insight Forum is co-organized with the Orange Tree Consultancy. Without further delay, may I now invite our panelists and moderator to take their seats on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming once again Deputy Minister of Defence Yang Berhormat Liew Tong, Member of Parliament for Rembau Yang Berhormat Khairy Jamaluddin, and NST leader writer Encik Abdul Rahim Maidin. It is now my pleasure to hand over the session to Encik Rahim.
Good afternoon. Welcome everybody, including the panelists, two panelists today, and also to the people who are watching us online from Malaysia as well as elsewhere. Thank you for being with us. My name is Abdul Rahim Maidin. I'm the leader writer with New Straits Times, and I will act as the moderator today. And before I do that, perhaps it will be good if I lay down the ground rules for the questions later. I will, of course, introduce Tong. Some people may be wondering why am I addressing him directly as a deputy minister, but they have licensed me to call them so I'll be informal, Tong and KJ. I will introduce them first, and after which they will speak for 10 minutes each. Initially, they were supposed to speak for 20 minutes, but in the pre-forum discussions we had just now, we have landed up on the theme that say less, listen more. So we will do that. With that, let me now give you a short, really very brief introduction, because I think their life is longer than my list, so I shall not spend too much of time on that. I will start with the Deputy Minister. Tong has been an MP since 2008, and he's a graduate of the Australian National University, and he read for the political science degree and a master's in regional integration. Not national integration, but regional. I suppose it covers. And I mean, some people may wonder, why is a deputy defense minister doing in an economic forum? Good question.
That will let me in trouble, right?
But he has been involved in economic issues for a long, long while. In fact, he has written in our opinion pages a couple of pieces, and he's planning more. So there is a very good reason why he's sitting here. And he's also a chairman of research for social advancement since 2012. Now for KJ, as you all know, he's an MP for Rambau, and he has been similarly an MP since 2008, and he was the former Minister of Youth and Sports. Interestingly, KJ has been a journalist for a while, and not many of you know this, in The Economist. So it's an interesting career as well. He has a master's degree from the University College. His first degree is from Oxford University. PPE, the famous, I think half the cabinet of the UK is, I mean, they have a PPE, I think, politics, philosophy, and economics.
That's not a good advertisement right now.
Okay. With that, may I now call upon Tong to speak for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Rahim, KJ, Kamal, and Rashid. I'm honored to be here today. I think in politics, we try to solve the problem of the next 20 days. But when you talk about economy, we may have to also think about the next 20 years. Because the problem we face today, in many ways, are the problems of the last 20 years. So imagine this, if someone from Beijing came to Kuala Lumpur in 1999, he would have thought that Kuala Lumpur was such an advanced city. But today, for those who are familiar with China, if you visit Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, these are the top cities, you think that those cities are first world cities. And say, for instance, someone who was born in 1999 in Beijing and come to KL today, they will think that we are not moving anywhere, and we are lagging behind from even China. Now, one of these issues is actually how to grow the nation and what do we think for the next 20 years. One area that we have to start with, where we have to start with, I think, is to look at wages. I think the number one issue on the minds of most politicians and the current discourse is cost of living. As if cost of living has increased a lot over the last 9 or 10 or 11 months. But since 2003, when Merdeka Center was set up, I have read almost all their public polls. Every public poll since 2003, about 16 years ago, cost of living has always been the number one issue. So we have been grappling with cost of living as an issue for the last 15, 16, or even 20 years, since the 1997 crisis. What is actually the real problem? The real problem is wages is too low. Wages is too low, and wages have stagnated over the last 20 years. Someone who came back, for instance, in 1999 from overseas education, they probably would offer 2,000 ringgit in 1999. But today, graduate pay could be even less than 2,000. What does that mean? That means that actually we have a real serious issue with wages. And what are the consequences? The consequences are many, and I give you one example. We are now one of the biggest nation of among the biggest nations of overstayers in Australia and New Zealand. So we have Malaysians who overstay, work there, pick fruits, and most of them are graduates. And we have, well, depends on whose report you go by, between 400,000 to 1 million Malaysians working in Singapore. And Bank Negara says that those who work in Singapore, 40% of them are actually in the 3D sector, dirty, difficult, dangerous. They are earning less than 2,000 Sing dollar. And when I ask them, how much are you prepared to come back to work, they said, maybe if you pay me 4,000 ringgit, I'll come back. But we are not generating that level of salary for people at the bottom because we have something called foreign workers. Now, depending on whose number you go by, it runs into a couple of millions. We have less than 2 million documented foreign workers, but those who are not documented, we don't know. The point is that we have Malaysians working as foreign workers in Singapore, but we are continuously working on a low-end economy and not moving anywhere. Less than 30% of jobs are actually skilled jobs. So how do we move from here? I think we will have to find a way to find a new deal. And that new deal is one that we will have to convince employers, we have to convince employees, we have to convince government that the low wage model is no longer relevant. The low wage model was very relevant when we exported to the US. The main destination of whatever we produce was to export to the US in the 1980s. But today, US is not able to consume so much that we produce, and there are so many other producers, China, Bangladesh, and other people who are exporting to the US. So what do? I think we have to think about a virtuous cycle. How do we pay people better? How do we, through automation, through skill upgrading, get everyone to work on a higher level and reduce the dependence on unskilled foreign labor? It is not easy. It is not easy to shift that mindset, but I think this is something that we'll have to do for the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. May I now call upon KJ?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rahim and Tong, Mohsin Rashid. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to start my remarks by dividing it into two. One is short-term and the other one is long-term. And the long-term remarks, I have a large area of agreement with Tong. And if you came here for fireworks, you might be disappointed because we actually think quite similarly on many issues. But the short-term prospects and challenges for the Malaysian economy challenges are tremendous. As you know, if you look at the economy through two lenses, one is the capital economy, and the other one is the people economy. The capital economy is essentially the financial sector, your macroeconomic figures, trade numbers, investments. And if you look at the capital economy, we are, of course, confronted with significant global headwinds. And Bank Negara has revised down its forecast for this year. Our capital markets, our equity markets, not doing very well, the worst performing in Asia this year. And of course, some of this is exogenous, external factors, and some of this is, of course, factors internally, which the government has to seriously look at. So if you look at the capital economy, there has to be a concerted effort at restoring market confidence. Of course, the stock market is not everything. The capital economy is not everything. But these are headline figures that instruct sentiment. And investors also invest not just on fundamentals, but on sentiment as well. So I think the government, of course, started off its term in office with a very clear narrative, agree or disagree, but it was a very clear narrative that the debt that they inherited was tremendous, bigger than was let on. Of course, some people agree with this narrative, some people disagree. I disagree with that narrative. But that obviously created a knock-on effect as far as sentiment was concerned. So the alarmist rhetoric will have to gradually, and it has gradually, been replaced by coming down to looking at how to regenerate the economy. I note that the government has, over the last couple of weeks, announced the resumption of certain projects like the East Coast Rail Link, Bandar Malaysia. Of course, these are big catalysts which allow the economy, or the wheels of the economy to turn. And is a suggestion that the government is actually finally looking forward with the economic narrative that this is the plan. We're starting to invest again. We're trying to pick up market sentiment and, of course, investor sentiment towards the economy. On the people economy, I think although PI indicate that inflation has slowed down, there was inflation in Malaysia. But as Chin Tong rightly pointed out, if you ask the person on the street whether or not prices have gone down, I think most people will say no. This may be anecdotal because KPDNKK, Ministry of Consumer Domestic Trade, has shown a list of prices that have gone down. But as per normal, when it's translated to the final price for retailers, people are just still saying that prices have not gone down. And that seems to be the sentiment throughout. And the other effect on the people economy, of course, is the reduction in certain transfer payments, certain income support, aids that were given by government previously has been reduced. Some of it was a policy decision, some of it was fiscal constraints that the current government faces. But of course, that has a impact on the ground. When you stop giving subsidies to fishermen, or you reduce it, when you stop giving the subsidies to smallholders, rubber smallholders, palm oil smallholders, obviously this has an effect on the ground, because this is actual money that can be spent in the economy. The propensity to consume by people on the low income level is actually high. So they actually consume, and that money goes back to the economy. So the economy is, the short-term prospects for the economy are extremely challenging. And I think the government will have to come up with a clear narrative that goes beyond, the national debt has ballooned to 1 trillion ringgit, we don't have enough money, these are because of scandals. Some of those criticisms are fair, but I think a lot of people are looking for a far clearer direction as far as the economy is concerned. It's short term. Long term, I think we're confronted with a lot of structural issues that of course, Pakatan has looked at as the government today, but that we were also looking at as the government prior to May 2018. Chin Tong mentioned a horizon of 20 years. Thank you. Chin Tong mentioned a horizon of 20 years. We looked into the next 30 years, up to 2050. Unfortunately, the exercise that we call the National Transformation 2050, in the run-up to the elections, of course, that entire exercise was perceived to be politicized, but it shouldn't take away from the actual work that was done in trying to future-proof our economy. We identified a lot of things that were challenges. I'll just raise some of them for brevity's purposes before we open up for question and answer. One is exactly what Ching Ton mentioned just now, which is salaries and wages. I personally believe that we need to move away just from looking at this issue through a minimum wage perspective and introduce what is called a living wage. You see, a minimum wage today, which is 1,200 ringgit a month, is not a living wage. You try to live with 1,200 ringgit in KL. It's impossible, next to impossible. So we need to understand what living wages are, especially in certain sectors and certain geographical locations. We need to look at how companies, corporations, can start paying more. And this is not an easy thing to fix. The only legislative lever that the government has today is the minimum wage. Beyond that, there's nothing. There's nothing. Of course, the government through GLCs can compel their GLCs to try to increase salaries, but even that is very difficult. We have to look at the median wage. We have to look at the ratio between the CEO and the median wage. Bank Negara came up with a report recently saying that actually Malaysian workers are underpaid compared to the productivity gains over the last few years. So we have to sit down with employers and find out how do we escape from this trap of paying too little for our workers and understand the concept of a living wage, that this is what is actually needed for somebody to live in certain geographical locations, and we identify what those locations are and what sectors can pay more, what companies can pay more, and tackle the wage issue apart from, of course, looking at the foreign worker, which Tong covered just now. Secondly is multidimensional inequality. Inequality is something that we have given very little public discourse space to, simply because I think we thought that, you know, when the tide rises, all boats rise. But inequality is still a serious problem in Malaysia. And of course, inequality has unfortunately not just a socioeconomic, but also an ethnic dimension to it as well, which obviously we want to eradicate poverty regardless of ethnicity, but the proportions or the proportionate poverty is quite correlates to certain ethnic categories. So that's still a problem. What do we do about inequality? Do we reform the tax system? I have been a proponent for reforming the tax system to make it more progressive, so that income tax at the top brackets, we introduce new brackets at the top where we get, you know, rich people to pay more tax, essentially. We've been thinking about the idea in policy circles of a wealth tax here. Very difficult to implement because when you implement a wealth tax, rich people just move their money around. So, you know, essentially wealth tax only works if it's at a global level, so you can't move your money around. This was proposed by French economist Thomas Piketty when he wrote about inequalities in wealth, not just income. So I think there needs to be a greater understanding of how we tackle multidimensional inequality. Social protection. We don't have enough for retirement. EPF has staggering figures about how 80% of EPF account holders have only enough for probably 5 years after they retire. So social protection is an issue that we need to really consider, because coming to future-proofing the country, by the year 2035, we will be an aging population. You will have, for the first time in Malaysia's history, more Malaysians above the age of 65 than under the age of 15. We essentially become an aging population. So when you have this situation where private sector employees don't have enough for their retirement, either you have to look at entitlement programs, which will cost the government a lot of money, or people will have to continue to work into their 60s and 70s. Well, you have a 90-year-old prime minister now, so that's rewritten everything. But so essentially, that your contract, your implicit social contract that you can retire at 60, and you know, you can live off your EPF, may not be the case anymore. We have to also look at value add in the economy. I agree with Tong that I don't think value creation is enough. And in particular, I'm very interested in SMEs because the SME contribution to the GDP has gone up to about almost 40% now. And we really need to encourage, incentivize SMEs to start investing in technologies of the future, investing in automation, in technology, because I think without a strong pool of small, medium businesses, the economy will become too dependent on large corporations. And I think, you know, every thriving economy in the world has a very strong pool of small and medium sector businesses. Related to that is the dependency on certain revenue for the government. And we need to think about this going forward over the next 30 years. I think the dependency on oil is still almost 20% government revenue. That has to change because obviously there are challenges with the oil and gas sector, price fluctuations, as well as it's a finite resource. So what happens in the future? Where are the new sources of funding for the government? And of course, reimagining government itself. You know, I think one of the biggest concerns sitting in the Parliamentary Select Committee for the budget is that a lot of your operating expenditure for the year is already locked in. And a big portion of that is, of course, emoluments, which is the term they use for government salaries. Nobody wants to cut the size of civil service because that's hugely political. But what do we do in the future? I mean, can you reimagine government so that it's not such a big overhead item on your annual operating expenditure budget, but also effective in delivering services? Of course, with automation, with AI, this is possible. And of course, you know, there's another issue with the size of the civil service, which is the pensions. Pensions will become a bigger item on your budget simply because people will live longer, longevity. Life expectancy now in the 80s, in 30 years it'll go up to 90 or even more. So if you give pension for life, which is essentially what the deal is for civil servants, that bill is going to go up from 20 billion today to maybe even 50 billion in the future. So these are things that I think we need to think about in the long term. I'm going to stop there and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, KJ. I think we will reserve more applause later in the day. Let me call for the question. I think there are a lot of people dying to ask. But before you do that, please come to the mic and identify yourselves and the organization you come from, and make it brief, please, because Malaysians have this habit of a long preamble. We have a very short time. So with that, may I have the first question, please? Thank you. Yes, gentlemen.
I'm Eric Chan. I work for a large MNC and returning Malaysian. And we came here because it's a country of great value. And been here for 4 or 5 years now. And thank you for addressing the issue around wages and stuff like that. And we realized that it's really hard trying to get good young Malaysians. And everywhere else I've worked in developed economies, I've come across some of the most impressive Malaysians across all levels, across the corporate stack. So what can we do about this? I mean, first of all, how can we keep Malaysians here? All right. Not just the people, the soul as well, the wealth, and also getting the young folks coming back in. And then I have a second part to that question. And Tong, I've heard you talk a lot about structural changes and an opportunity for our country to look at structural changes. And you were right, you know, and we've started to look at things around 20 days instead of 20 years. So if you can highlight a little bit about structural changes we're going through now and what we're actually doing about it, and as Malaysians, what can we do?
Your question is directed to Tong or both?
Both, and then the structural changes one is towards Tong.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think fundamentally, our economy has to change from one that value body count to one that values skills. If we continue to value body count, we'll just need more foreign workers, more unskilled labor. But if we think that this is an economy that values skill, we will have to pay for skill, and we'll have to, as an economy, we will need to reach that consensus, that compact, that New Deal. And employers, employees, government will have to agree that to move forward, we have to pay for skills. And when we pay for skill, that means we don't pay for body count. For instance, and I don't think, I have a lot of problem with the old approach of looking at talent, because The old approach was to look at trying to bring back top talent, but how to match, say, a 15,000 Sing dollar income. Bringing someone who earns 15,000 Sing dollar, we may not have that ecosystem. But it is for us to build that ecosystem of paying nurses who are now paid, say, a nurse with 8 years experience in a private hospital in Malaysia, she's probably paid 3,500. But she will be paid 3 to 4,000 Sing dollar. Instead of paying her 3 to 3,500 ringgit, are we prepared to pay this person 6,000 ringgit? Because for someone to come back from, say, Singapore, they are not looking at one-to-one matching salary. They are looking at, say, 2/3 of the salary. Now, can we start from the bottom? If we can start from the bottom to build, then we'll be able to build an economy that values skill from the bottom, and then you build on top of it. What I did together with the former Penang Chief Minister, who is now Finance Minister in Penang, was that we were pushing for paying Malaysian cleaners or garbage collectors in the city council with better wages. Like most local council, the MPSP was actually hiring foreign workers through contractors. So there were about 100 contractors when we took power in 2008. Most of them, of course, were cronies, whichever way. And we waited for the contract to expire. And every contract expired, we hired Malaysian. We offer direct contract position to individuals. Instead of giving contractors, we give it to individuals. And eventually, MPSP hired 2,500 Malaysians, 90% Malays, at the pay of 1,400 plus, with a take-home pay of 1,900. So, low-end workers at 1,900 ringgit take-home pay. Now, if the entire economy replicate that, that means we will not be able to pay fresh graduate at 1,009, because otherwise all fresh graduate will become garbage collector, because it pays better. Likewise, I have been saying this over the last few months, and I've been trying to engage KDN to think about this. We are a strange nation. We hire 200,000 security guards, and of these 200,000 security guards, most of them are from Nepal, as if Nepalese are good security guards. But some of them do not speak the language. When there's a crime scene, they actually can't make police report. We're hiring them for body count, but not for what they should do. Imagine that, let's say in 5 years' time, we can work our way to change the institutional framework, regulatory framework. Some people have to suffer, perhaps, maybe those who have whole licenses may have to make adjustment. Eventually, let's say we shrink this sector to only 70,000 people. And out of those 70,000 people, 90% Malaysians, over a period of 5 years. But what do? You use CCTV, you use gadget, you use a lot of other ways to ensure that you use less labor, and eventually you pay each of them better. Now, someone has done it before. Bank Negara shrink its security guards workforce from 600 to 300, and now each of them are police bantuan, and as a police bantuan you have to be Malaysian, and each of them are taking home about 3,000 ringgit. Now, if at that level people are paid 3,000 or 3,500, then you cannot pay a fresh grad at 2,000, because they'll become security guards. So I think we need that building block. Construction sector, how do we transform construction sector jobs from laying bricks to building IBS? Each sector will require that painful process of refashioning jobs. And of course, we also have to look at new sector, new growth sector, green jobs, healthcare jobs, caring jobs. We will have to go through that difficult process as a nation and eventually come to an economy that values skill and not body count. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Chin Tong. Now, KJ.
Hi, Eric. did recognize you there. Just to add on to some of the sensible comments that Tong has made. On salary, I think although salary is not everything, that's a huge determining factor for talent coming back or leaving Malaysia. And I think you can't offer every single Malaysian talent out there on a case-by-case basis. You could, but that's going to be very expensive. The better way of doing it, of course, is to try to change the wage structure in Malaysia so that it eventually rises. One issue that we really need to look at is information asymmetry as far as wages are concerned. People simply don't know what the market wage is when they apply for many jobs. That's information that is guarded by employers. And when there's no transparency as far as wages are concerned, it's easier to suppress wages because a lot of people don't know what to ask for and how to price themselves better. So when there's information asymmetry, the market will tend to push the wages down. So we can look at how to make the wages more transparent when people are recruiting, so that people can understand that's how much they value these skills today, and people can see whether or not employers are pushing wages down for certain areas. The second larger issue with talent being overseas is, having said that salary is a big component, is that people also come back for other reasons. And we have to develop those reasons as the pull factor to get people back here. And one big reason for people to come back to Malaysia is the quality of life. Yes, Singapore has many advantages living in Singapore, but there are also other advantages that you enjoy living in Malaysia. Probably, property that where you can have a garden, where you live on a street, where it's landed, schools which are more affordable, domestic help that may not be accessible in Singapore. So I think we should also spend a lot of time and effort in enhancing quality of life in Malaysia, so that people come back here, not just for the salary, because it's not one-to-one, as Tong said, but also, there's no crime, you address crime, you have gentrified areas in Kuala Lumpur, you have good accommodation, you have good property, good public transport. These are things, I think, which make Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur also attractive for people to come and live here. Because if you're going to compete with Singapore, and I use Singapore as an example because that's a destination for a lot of Malaysian talent, on salary, you're not going to get there overnight, especially. So we have to find out, what are the reasons why people move back here, and perhaps those are the reasons or things that we can enhance. And you enjoy your pastime in much more affordable way in Malaysia than you do in Singapore, for instance.
Thanks, Khairy. Can we have, yes, lady. Can I, my apologies, lady.
Thank
No,
you so much.
I saw her first, so.
Okay. Hi, Assalamualaikum. Okay, my name is Norjuma. Basically, I'm an employer. Okay, if employer to about 300 people. Okay, I'm surprised that today conference or talks is all about wages, because I believe like in Malaysia when we talk about economy, nobody actually come with the integrated data.
Your question, please.
I'm not sure. My question is simple. How many states we have in Malaysia, and how many actually the productive age in Malaysia? Because by understanding the data, we can understand why we have the issue of wages, income, and when we divide about economy, we're always talking about macro and micro. Basically, we are talking about domestic economy and we are talking about international economy. So my question is simple. What is the code of each state and how many states that we have? Because this will determine, number one is income tax. Number two will determine a per capita income. Thank you.
Is the question clear, please?
My question is simple. How many states? Because from the state, we can understand the income and the expenses of the government.
Sorry, state as in negeri?
Yeah.
Okay, there's 14 states.
How about Labuan?
I mean, there's 13 plus the federal territories, yeah? So,
Yeah,
but
because this will determine the income tax code and the income per capita. So that will derive back to the employer about our income in the company and our tax system, social welfare. So, okay,
No,
that's okay.
Uh,
So my question is that if you have 14 states, how did we derive the topic about wages? You know, to improve the wages, is it based on the state
right,
or is it based on the industry?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you.
one of the, in the minimum wage legislation, it doesn't, you can set minimum wage based on locality. And that's what some countries do. They set minimum wage based on locality, states. I think that's what Nojuma was asking. So, so for instance, I think it's actually a sensible point. You cannot look at nationwide salaries and peg that as a minimum wage. So I've suggested sectoral minimum wage as well as geographic minimum wage. Of course, this is going to be a bit tricky to implement because there's going to be a lot of data needed to understand different sectors. So let me give you an example. Should the minimum wage in Kuala Lumpur, for instance, be 1,200 ringgit, or should it be more for companies who are in Kuala Lumpur? What should the minimum wage be in Sabah and Sarawak? This was a political issue because we had said it differently, and Pakatan, of course, made it the same, Sabah and Sarawak. But take away the Sabah Sarawak Peninsula, should the minimum wage in urban areas be the same as rural areas? That's a sensible point, I think, that the government should consider, and sectorally as well, because minimum wage for a lot of small companies is tough. It's tough to meet. But big companies with big bottom lines should be paying more. That's the logic behind sectoral or minimum wage based on the size of the company. Yeah, so it's a sensible suggestion and something that I've raised as well.
Thank you. Tong, do you want to?
I think sometimes different people have different understanding of sectoral and geographical minimum wage. I don't want to go into that dispute, but I feel that actually we are more similar than we think. 78% of Malaysians are living in urban areas. 70% of Malays are living in urban areas. So in many ways, we are actually in very similar situation, and most young people, most working age people are actually working in cities. So I think that we may not have to go into too much of detail, but to think of the national policies in order to generate an ecosystem. What I'm thinking is more of an ecosystem that is transformative, that value scale instead of value body count, and through that we build the next level of economy. So if we actually as a nation we value skill instead of value body count, then from there we can build, for instance, what are our next step of investment into what area, and from there we will have to ask a lot more questions, not just wages. For instance, over the years we have been very focused on helping foreign direct investment to invest in Malaysia. We give them all sorts of pioneer status, incentive, but at some point we will have to ask, given that we have less labor now, and we no longer have what they call population dividend, what do we do? Do we still help foreign companies, foreign capitals that invest into Malaysia to hire foreign labor? Or we actually have to ask ourselves, should we also groom domestic capital in order for them to be global champion in 5, 10, 15 years? Now, those are questions that we will have to ask. Not easy. It's a mindset shift. How do we actually help domestic brands to not just be what they call contractor for OEM, but actually producing something that we can be proud of. Now, I mean, these are difficult questions that we'll have to ask, and of course, you have to also ask of structural questions. Do we reform the institutions? Do we cut down corruptions? Do we cut down favoritisms? It has to come in a package.
Okay, thank you, Jin Tong. If I may get the Haji who almost went to the mic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your name and...
I'm Lokman bin Mohammed. I'd like to address the issue of economics. We spoke about salary issue. In the 90s, Milton Friedman is the economic figure. It's all about shareholders' value enrichment, no compromise. 25 years later, we have Richard Thaler, behavioral economics. And lately, we have cultural economics. Along the way, our ex-governor quoted to us about value-based mediation.
And the question is?
And the question is about transformation or leadership from the past model to the new model after the economic crisis in America, housing crisis in America, and the economic crisis in Europe. I believe we have a very good balance sheet, profit and loss account over 60 years to analyze the problem. We used to be, what they call it? We are based on our resources, the richness of the resources. Last time we have timber, then we go on to oil, and then the labor. We produce electronics for the US market. In Penang, big Intel, big production here. So we didn't really follow the age of what we have. For example, 50 years ago, no developer, no architect, no bank, everybody have a home. So my question is, what is the leaders now really understand what's happening on the ground? There's a big gap. We are from the analog generation. Now it's digital. How do you bridge that?
Okay.
There's a gap there.
Perhaps that's the question.
Yes. The question is, there's no trade union boys here. You are talking about salary. I'm waiting to see any trade union rep here. Thank you.
Thank you, Haji. We will ask Jin Tong first to answer, and then KJ.
I'm not sure which are your number one questions, but I think you touched on the financialization of the economy. We may have to ask ourselves, in the years to come, are we still so dependent on property as a sector? Do we have to rethink? See, for instance, now more than 50% of bank loans goes to car and property. Is it a productive way of using our societal capital? Do we channel those or guide those what they call the investment, instead of investing in property and car? We have to guide the society eventually to invest in productive capital, productive activities. Now, how do we do that? I think those are issues that will require us to have a lot more debate. Instead of thinking of property as a sector, and instead of property, and part of the problem I can share with you is that when you look at FDI figures, you have to look at how much is actually investment into property. And I advocate that take out the property part from the FDI figures so that you know how much is into productive sectors. So those are the questions. I hope I touch on some of your concerns.
It's a very important point that you raise, simply because I think we need to, and some economists are starting this again, which is to start the discussion on what constitutes value in an economy. Because of what was mentioned just now, the financialization of the economy. You see, economies and the output, productive output of an economy those days were things that people made, you know, industrialization, manufacturing, services that facilitated those things. With the financialization of the economy in the 90s, a lot of value extraction suddenly became value creation. So, you know, clever bankers started to create a lot of derivative products, which actually didn't offer much productive output to the economy, but made them a lot of money. And of course, led to the financial crisis that we're still recovering from. So we have to understand what is value, real value creation in an economy, and what is rents. You know, rents in an economy usually are defined as you know, corruption, politicians and businesses working together, commissions and things like that. But rents also exist in sectors like finance, in certain services sector, where it's not actually productive or productive output to the economy. So I think we have to define what is value, what adds value to the economy, and look at the Malaysian economy and what is truly adding value to us. The point about foreign companies or MNC setting up factories here, I mean, how much value creation is there for Malaysia when they don't employ Malaysians, when a lot of the profits are repatriated? So what is the value creation there? You can be proud of your FDI figures, but what is actually the contribution there? So there is something to be said about industrialization. Of course, industrialization today is not the same as industrialization in the 80s or the 90s, but there has to be something. There needs to be something to be said about relooking at Malaysia's industrialization plan and seeing whether or not we can create value through Malaysian companies making things, productive capital.
Thank you. Yes. I'll come back to you, sorry.
My name is Aziz. I'm from a company called Mazer. Okay, I have two comments and one question. The comments, of course, relating to wages. I think we should not look at wages in isolation, because wages is a subjective matter relative to cost of living. So one way of ensuring that wage is enough is making sure that the cost of living is controlled. So if there is not a high cost of living, then people will not be asking for more wages. Maybe that's a layman's view. I'm quite layman in this matter. Then the other one, coming to your comment about the engineers being paid less than before, I think it's just a question of supply and demand. There are too many graduates looking for very few jobs around, fighting for few. That's all. I think if there are less graduates around, of course they will be paid higher. Okay, that is the comment. The question is, many years ago, I think the government talked about knowledge economy. So I just like to know, how far have we gone with this? Have we made any inroads into this knowledge economy? Thank you.
Tong.
Comment on the cost of living. I think that can be one way of looking at it. If your economy is totally close to other country and there's no exchange rate problem, you don't import, then I think you can say, okay, let's press wages and also cost of living down, or make it equalizing. Therefore, there's nothing to worry. But I don't think we're in that situation. But anyway, I think in terms of cost of living, we may also need to rethink. For instance, do we need to own a car, each of us own a car, or whether the government can rethink a bus-based public transport model. For instance, we are now, because we cap oil at about at 208, and each month at least 300 to 400 million spent on it. Can we actually pay people to take bus? I'm saying something that is outrageous. But in the long run, if we look back, or we think through this whole question, instead of everyone driving a car and 20% of bank loan goes to car, can we consider a society in which we are more bus-based, and bus can be made free or near free, or even us paying people to take bus. In exchange, in the long term, petrol price is not subsidized. We're not talking about short term. The moment, the next day you say, Tong say don't subsidize petrol, then, but we're talking about long term. Can we subsidize buses? Can we subsidize public transport in exchange of not subsidizing petrol in the years to come? Of course, sequencing is important. Of course, you do it now, then you have a political backlash. But once you provide sufficient public transport, and when driving becomes a luxury and not a necessity, can we have a different type of society? Housing. Does everyone need to own a house? Or actually, some houses can be built for rent, and we have a stronger rental market that protect both the owner as well as those who rent. Now, those are areas in which we can look into, but however you do it, controlling prices has its limitation. Controlling cost of living has its limitation. When you have a 20-year period of stagnation, wage stagnation, this is what we are dealing with and we have to grapple with. Thank you.
Yeah. This is actually a fundamental philosophical issue about subsidies and subsidizing. Fuel subsidies are regressive subsidies. Simply because there's so much data to show that fuel subsidies, blanket fuel subsidies, benefit people who are higher income than lower income. They use more fuel, their cars are bigger, and therefore they enjoy more subsidies than lower income groups. But it's also a highly political issue, as Tong said. And Tong said it's not the right time to do it now because of the political cost. I would argue that it is the right time to do it now because you got 4 more years to recover. So don't put it off like us. But fuel subsidies are regressive subsidies. But people need to understand this. Public transport subsidies can be progressive. It depends how you structure it, of course. And I think the more people understand economic concepts like that fuel subsidies are regressive subsidies and public transport subsidies can be progressive, as in it benefits more lower income group, then you would make the case for that. And I think it's a philosophical issue that we really need to address. Otherwise, we take the easy way out, and every government, whether it's PH or BN, dare not touch fuel subsidies. Or if you do, you lose the elections. So I think it's an important debate to have. Knowledge economy, sir. You raised the knowledge economy just now. I don't think they call it the knowledge economy anymore. It's gone through various iterations, digital economy, whatever, gig economy. It's all to do with what you raised earlier. We had a knowledge economy master plan in the early 2000s. My concern is inequality in the knowledge or digital economy. We are playing catch up. Malaysia always plays catch up, in manufacturing, industrialization, now services. And other countries are leaps and bounds ahead. Tong mentioned about the change in landscape in China from the late 90s to now. Imagine not just the changing landscape, but the investments that they have made into artificial intelligence. China will be a leader in AI in a few years. Where are we? The big inequalities of the future will not just be income inequality, wage inequality. It'll be who owns technology, who owns the robots, who owns the codes that power artificial intelligence, who owns the automation. And once that happens, you create a new set of inequalities, which will be very, very difficult to level out. So a lot of people are looking at robot taxes, the fact that companies and individuals cannot possibly own everything, all the rights to algorithms and robots that will fuel the economies of the future. So yes, we are under-invested in the knowledge economy, but also there are glaring inequalities that will take place if we're not ready for what's to come.
All right, thank you. I promised the gentleman, I'll come back to you. Okay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Zakaria. I'm a corporate advisor for Petticorp Sdn G7, Super G7. I'm also the special officer for Yayasan Manan Ameh. My question is, did Malaysian economy shrinking? I want to know that. Malaysian economy is shrinking. Is it shrinking? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's not shrinking. Statistically, it's not shrinking. I mean, your quarterly numbers are still showing growth. So statistically, it's not shrinking. So I don't know if that answer. This is a factual question. It's just a yes or no. It's not shrinking. Maybe your concern is something else. I don't know. The statistics don't show that it's shrinking. It's not growing as fast as some forecasts. Sorry, I had to get that in there. But but it's not shrinking, to be honest. It's not.
We have been advised by our financial advisor that Malaysian economy is shrinking. So if you have money, is it distribute?
You mean you?
Bank or in the at home?
Oh, okay. Right.
So if everyone keeps their money, then you'll shrink faster.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Your question, please.
Thank you. My name is Swee Keng. I'm a physician. I've just come back from overseas as well, just 3 weeks ago. 2 questions. The first one is internal, the second one is external. The internal question is regarding the role of the federal government in the economy. For example, in past years, they've been quite statist. They've also been quite interventionist, quite paternalist as well. So I wonder what you think is the correct role for the federal government in the Malaysian economy. The second question is regarding the question about inequality, but let's make it more global. Capital flight is going to be a problem. There will be a race to the bottom if we put a 14% corporate tax. Some country will put an 11% corporate tax. As we build the SME sector, how do we avoid that race to the bottom? So first question, role of the statist economy or rather the federal government. Secondly, how do we avoid a race to the bottom? Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll take the first question about the internal role for the federal government. I'm more Keynesian, so I believe in a role for the state in the economy. I'm certainly not a libertarian, or I don't believe in a night watchman state where the government is just there to watch and make sure things don't go wrong. I think there is a role for the government, but to me, we have to redefine the role for the government. You see, Keynesians will say that governments should come in and correct market failure. So where the markets can't serve, the government comes in, in a recession, or spend the way out of recession, fiscal stimulus and things like that. I think government can do more than that. Government can also create a regulatory environment where it's easier to create value in the economy. I think the government should lessen its involvement in direct business. That's for certain. I think we should eventually start seeing less government holdings and direct management of large corporations. But that takes time, obviously, because there's certain strategic concerns with some of these GLCs. But the government should redefine itself as not just there to correct market failure, but also to add value to the economy by allowing the private sector to flourish. On the race to the bottom, again, it's very difficult to compete with other jurisdictions. Singapore, other countries, Hong Kong has very, very low corporate tax rates, and a lot of companies set up there because of the low tax environment. So just with wages, you can't compete with that. You have to start thinking about other things. to attract them to Malaysia. And that's where, as I said earlier, government playing that facilitating role of trying to ensure that there are other reasons for companies to be here. Of course, a lot of these MNCs get tax holidays, 10 years, whatever it is, pioneer status. I agree with Chin Tong, we should review this because, I don't think they should enjoy such long tax breaks. We should find other reasons for them to come here. Workforce, talent, government policy, that doesn't disbenefit or disadvantage us like losing out on taxes. And I think the race to the bottom, you can join that. We can't join that because we lose a lot of revenue. Government as it is already short on revenue. But I think we should try to find out what are the other pull factors to get companies to come and invest in Malaysia and for Malaysian companies to develop as well.
I can't remember who said we are all Keynesian now. I am also a self-defined Keynesian, but there are two parts to it. One is that I think conventionally Keynesian focuses on jobs, and I also subscribe to the idea that when government is managing the economy, if you go by neoliberal thinking, you're managing inflation and inflation and interest rate as your main concern. Whereas if you go by Keynesian thinking, you're more focused on jobs. Now that is the conventional part of me. But the other part of me is that I think I also read Mazzucato. And I think if you look at Mazzucato's view, there is a progressive and also proactive role that the state can play in creating technology, in creating an environment where the nation as a whole invests in technology. So we give an example. Internet was actually started by government, by the military. Siri, GPS, these were all invented by the military, eventually become civilian technology. So the role of the government in the economy, it has that role as well. But of course, the way we run it here, we will have to review. Should government own banks, or should government just regulate banks? Should government own private sector housing developer? Should government be housing developer? That we may have to ask. Should JLC be housing developers, or the government just provide public housing and leave the role of housing developer to private sector and regulate them rigorously? So we may have to ask these questions in the long run. On your second question, you see, the countries or the city-states that can actually go into a race to the bottom has no hinterland problem. So Singapore, Hong Kong has no hinterland problem. But for other country which has a hinterland, the cost of running the nation is not just about cities, but it's also about the hinterland. That is one situation that this race to the bottom, we can't follow this race to the bottom because we do have a hinterland to handle. Secondly, even city-state like Singapore and Hong Kong is now facing democratic challenges. See, when you're an authoritarian nation and city-state, you don't have to worry about providing that much of social goods. But when you are in a democratic competition leading up to an election in Singapore, for instance, or in Hong Kong, with the umbrella movement, with people very unhappy with housing, very unhappy with a lot of other public services, because the government collects very little taxes, therefore provide very little social services, at some point they will face challenges that they cannot handle. So I don't think we should join the race to the bottom. I agree with KJ that we should be a destination of investment for other reasons instead of tax incentive. And I think there's one question that our society do not have a consensus as yet. Do we compete with Vietnam or we compete at different level? Okay, this is a difficult question because today Chinese company from China are thinking of moving out. And I've met investors from China and say, we're now thinking between you or Vietnam. But of course, labor cost is a consideration. But labor cost in Vietnam is also not cheap. But do we compete with Vietnam or we have to set ourselves for some higher challenges? I would say that we shouldn't compete with Vietnam. We should compete at a different level. So we should not compete of being a cheap destination. We should compete as being a good destination for various other reasons.
Thank you. It was Milton Friedman who said we are all against.
Do you have a follow-up question? Was it a follow-up question to that?
Perhaps a clarification, but I don't want this to be a dialogue. I'll go. So thanks very much for your answers. My first question is about the role of the federal government. Without really going into a discussion about macroeconomic theory, the federal government, let me make a proposition, I'd love to hear your thoughts. The federal government could perhaps be over-involved in the Malaysian economy for reasons that you've already mentioned, but let me add one more, that they're already being quite paternalist and centralized in making decisions on behalf of the states, for example. To what extent should we liberalize the Malaysian economy, maybe even allow state-on-state competition, if so to speak? That's my first proposition. My second proposition is to agree with your refusal to join a race to the bottom. I fear it might be inevitable, so I think we should be courageous in withstanding that particular pressure. We're happy to hear your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I think in principle, I think decentralization is the way to go. It's proven around the world that especially when we're in opposition now. No, I mean there are a lot of success stories of decisions being made, decentralized at the ground level, far removed from central bureaucracy that makes more sense. And I think that's something that the government should look into. There is a big debate about state rights right now, which revolves around Sabah and Sarawak, and I think we can sort of extend the debate from there to the other states. Of course, Sabah and Sarawak have a different deal than the other states, the states of the Malay Peninsula of Tanah Melayu. They obviously have a different deal, and I think how that equal partnership, quote unquote, turns out can also be not a model, but a lesson for decentralization to other states. It also comes with challenges, yeah? And I don't want to go into this too much, but when you talk about equal partners, Peninsula Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, that has a financial implication as well. And states will start asking, we want to get from the federal government how much taxes we raise for the federal government. So that creates a problem, because then the richer states or the states where a lot more GDP is produced or taxes are collected will end up getting more from the central government. Whereas this hinterland problem also suggests that you have to look after everybody in the federation. So it's not just a simple matter of amending the constitution. It also has to look at what the financial implications are in the case of Sabah and Sarawak.
I think I have been an advocate of decentralization since my days in Penang. I still believe that we have to decentralize certain functions of the federal government at some point to the state government. Now, Malaysia borrow our constitutional framework from India, and India borrows from Australia. So more or less, our political structures are quite similar. Now, if you look at India, the police is actually a state police. Police is actually a state matter. Policing is a state matter. Hospital in Australia, schools in Australia are actually run by the state government. With some federal grant, but competitive grant and all this. But essentially, it is under the purview of the state government. Now, we have a rather centralized structure that everything is run by federal government, except land, religion, and perhaps resources. Yeah. So there is a problem there, in the sense that state government primary role will be to sell land. or Balak. Now, how do we move away from there? I think at some point we have to start thinking of sharing income tax collection, in exchange of services provided by the state. So it's not that you take the money without obligation. The obligation is that you start running some services, state runs certain services that previously under the purview of federal government, in exchange of certain percentage of income tax. And I think that would be good for the economy in the sense that the state government will have a stake in ensuring that the state grow well instead of thinking of bala. So I think that is something that we'll have to do.
And the point is a real point, because if you are a state Menteri Besar or chief minister, how can you possibly raise money? You know, I mean, there's a limit to municipality taxes that you can raise. So the only thing under your purview is religion and land. So either you deforest your state, or I don't know how you can sell religion, but that's it. So your avenues to raise funds are severely curtailed, and this is written in law. It's in the Constitution.
Oh, yep, one. We are running short of time. Please make it very brief.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Muhammad Ghazali from Tindakan Strategy. I was working in the government before. I was with Mr. Anwar and I was also with Mahathir. That's how I'm coming. We have not addressed, ladies and gentlemen, that the way we look at the Malaysian economy in the conventional model, capitalism, and that's all. Have you not thought today there are many other models of how we design this country? For a fact, in Europe, they don't use capitalism. They have really moved away. And recently, if you have read one major corporate leader of America say, we have a problem with capitalism in America. And he suggests, why not use Islamic economics? Because Islamic economics is not neither profit, neither just public good for its own sake. It has a moral imperative to make sure the pursuit of happiness and success for everybody. Therefore, there is a role of the state, the role of corporate sector, and the role of the people. In Europe, they use cooperatives. Today, we are not using it. My question is that we are not introducing alternatives. Secondly, to Mr. Liew, Tong, and all of us today, Singapore, Singapore, Hong Kong, Dubai is not our economic equivalent. It is impossible to ask that question. Why should we follow that? That's not the solution in the whole place. I mean, your whole public policy will be outrageously wrong because we inherited the unfinished business of development from history, from our own political masters, and also new ways of how we look to this nation. I would think today, we must Malaysian, for us the challenge is how we make Malaysia a global nation. Once you make the world your palm, you have for everybody. Therefore, we train Malaysians to be great people, not small people, and the city and the rural areas must have equal share of the economy. But let not understood that we do not want political or economic malafide disturbing this country. The recent incident today, when yesterday the UBS economy make a wrong, economic, quote-unquote, figure to lie, it just clashed our stock market. Similarly, what you did before, or 1 million. I'm a multilateral development strategist in the Islamic Development Bank. The way they define nations, develop economics, are not corporate economics. Let us not confuse today, because state economics, corporate economics have different independent variables. So we have to understand when we bring Malaysia, do not confuse the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Haji.
I never say Singapore is the model that we should follow. In fact, I say Singapore is not able to sustain such a low tax regime when there are democratic competition domestically, and also eventually they will have to face with the consequences of choosing to continue that model, or at some point they will have to raise taxes one way or the other. I think perhaps in the long run we may also want to think that if let's say we have a 20 years horizon, we may not necessarily have to think of Singapore in the current state. I remember when Iskandar was introduced, I was interviewed by Wan Hamidi at that time, and then I say that was in 2005 or 2006. Yeah, so I say we'll perhaps have to understand whether Iskandar is Shenzhen or something else. So if Shenzhen to Singapore, then that relationship we'll have to see how to shape that economy. But we never know that in 15 years' time, now if you look at Shenzhen and Hong Kong, Shenzhen is more advanced than Hong Kong. Shenzhen is more advanced than Hong Kong technologically in terms of density of corporations, in terms of GDP. Shenzhen is bigger. So if we take a 15 years or 20 years point of view, if we can reshape our economy, our economic relationship with Singapore may not be what we see today. Yeah, so that's a point that I would like to make. But okay, on your questions of the moral obligation of economic thinking, I subscribe to that. I see myself as a social democrat. I talk about valuing people instead of valuing skill and not body count. I think about dignified and decent jobs. To me, in order for an economy to function well, in order for social cohesion to happen, we need to create dignified and decently paid jobs for ordinary people. So once your society has, majority of people get decent paid job with things that they are interested in, and they actually are gainfully employed, you will have a different type of social environment. You will have a different type of political environment because at the heart of all this is about the dignity of the person.
Sorry. Actually, today is great eye-opener. So many religious people, looking people, talking about the economy. I just wanted to address the point, the philosophical point about capitalism. I think if you're intellectually honest and you understand even basic economics, you will have come to the conclusion that that capitalism has serious weaknesses, and it's by no means, as it is liberal capitalism, the best economic system by any means. I also do believe that we need an economic system that is based on values and not just profit. Values with a big V and values with a small v. Value as in you understand what value creation is, as opposed to just creating money like magic, like that on a screen. And values that an economy that cares, socioeconomic justice, no wide gulfs of inequality. But having said, sir, Tuan Haji Ghazali just now, that we are also a global nation. So how do we pursue that economic system without being punished? Without being punished by the markets? So we're too hardwired into the global economic system. And unless there's a fundamental rethink at an international level, then economies who want to depart from the market consensus will find themselves in trouble. You know, why do we care so much about what rating agencies have to say? Simply because they wield an inordinate amount of power on us, because we still raise our monies through the capitalist international capital markets. If the rating agencies downgrade our ratings, then the amount of money that we'll have to pay for our loans will increase, and our national debt will therefore increase as well. So yes, we try to do whatever we can internally, and a lot of countries have started to move away from hard right capitalism, but the international financial structure has still not been reformed. And that is truly the biggest challenge globally, because big banks, the international capital markets, of which subscribe to that philosophy that we disagree with, are still holding us to ransom on a lot of matters.
On the question, on just your remark that there are religious people talking about the economy, I want to share with you an experience. I was in Turkey meeting a person from Ikhwan in 2015. That was like 2 years after Morsi was arrested or defeated. And I had this, after an hour and a half chatting with this senior Ikhwan leader, I had this feeling that Ikhwan had no economic plan. And I feel that we'll have to move away, say for Islamic movement, it will be important to move away just from labor. I think in the 80s we were talking about Islamic finances, we're talking about trying to harmonize Islamic values with capitalism. But I think we'll have to move into more value-based discussions, more towards ensuring that the person or the human being is given a dignified position in the economy. That will require a lot of reforms and rethinking. On KJ's point about banks, rating agencies, I think they are important, but at the same time, we as a society will have to debate some of these choices. We'll have to tell everyone that what we say today is not for implementation tomorrow, but to handhold the society to rethink and slowly move one step at a time. Now, I think rating agencies are also run by human beings, much as they pretend they are not. For instance, on the questions of deficit, I think slightly higher deficit is acceptable. But of course, you need to have a clear plan. For instance, this government explained to the rating agencies were having a certain amount of deficit because we have to pay this, we have to do this reform, and we give you a plan, or give the market a plan. In 3 years' time, we want to cut down corruptions, we want to cut down this and that, in order that, and also we want to have certain transparency commitment. Rating agencies can also be persuaded, because if you have a plan and if your plan is genuine, I think you can carry people along.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Any takers? Otherwise, I would do. Is it okay? All right.
Thank you. Two brief thoughts and then the question to Tuan Haji. The first one is I'm encouraged that there are no countries in this world that's completely capitalist. So even the United States spends 42% of their healthcare from the government rather than from the private sector. The second one is capitalism is probably a stepping stone for us to reach the next, say, iteration of how we organize the global economy. Those are my two thoughts. My question is regarding the economy and healthcare. In 2035, we will have more old people than we have young people. The dependency ratio will completely change. We will have people living to 100 years old. Right now, the pension systems and EPFs, private sector and public sector are simply not equipped for this. How do you think the Malaysian economy can retool, or what new policies do you think we need in order to preserve the health of our older citizens coming very soon?
Thank you.
A good plan.
I think we have to spend a lot more attention, resources on preventative medicine or healthcare, as well as primary healthcare. Slowly moving that to the person, the individual, using technology, obviously. That can reduce costs, and also that will give somebody ownership over his or her own health. What I mean to say is that, of course, preventative healthcare, you take NCDs, for instance. If you don't spend now on a better lifestyle and also certain legislation, one of the good things that the Pakatan government has done is on smoking ban, the soda or sugar tax that's going to come into place. I don't know how much or whether or not that will lead to large behavioral changes of people drinking fizzy drinks, but it's a start. That goes to show that governments have a role in trying to change or nudge behavior so that you pay less later. When I was Minister of Sports, one of the big programs that we did was Fit Malaysia, simply because not just to make Malaysia a sporting nation, but to hold off a big bill, public health bill, later on when people suffer from NCDs, non-communicable diseases. You can also use technology, for instance, wearable devices, which are becoming very, very prevalent now, so that primary healthcare is also the patient or the individual can monitor directly and send their ECG results in real time to their physicians, and I think that will go some way in addressing the impending health crisis that may occur if we don't prevent some of these illnesses from happening.
I'm generally agreeable with what KJ suggested. I'll give you an example. I now learned that the armed forces, or actually the government has to pay about 60 million ringgit for dialysis for military veterans each year. And at some point we will have to think through, for instance, the armed forces from enroll to retirement and to post-retirement healthcare. It has to be holistically thought through so that you can deal with this. And I was told that JPA has a much higher bill for dialysis. So this is something that we'll have to deal with. But also, on the other hand, I want to say that perhaps we have to re-look at how we pay for healthcare in our society. We have a dual system, but this dual system may not necessarily be very efficient for our society to handle healthcare. For instance, most of the private hospitals in this country are actually owned by GLC. So you have GLC providing private healthcare, and then you have government providing public healthcare. And usual rule applies, 70% of patients goes to public hospital with 30% of medical resources, and the other way around. So at some point we'll have to think through, we will still have private hospitals, but at the same time, how do we actually strengthen public hospital, and how to finance it? Those are difficult questions that we'll have to ask in the years to come.
Well, thank you very much. We have come to the end. All good things must end, and so it has to end now. Thank you for a wonderful session, and this is our first, and we hope to have many more. And thank you. You have been a wonderful audience, and thank you to the people online. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerahim. Thank you, Yang Berhormat Liew Tong and Yang Berhormat Khairy Jamaluddin and members of the audience. Indeed, that has been an excellent insight onto the topic and the questions that were raised. As a token of our appreciation, we would like to call upon Cik Mustafa Kamil to come on stage to present mementos to our panelists.